The Rainbow Tower. Written by Alex Tymms. Illustrated by R H Stewart. Episode 22. Yellow. From his position against the wall, Jed saw Graham and Clarice hauled into the corridor. Behind them, Harris was putting up a fight, protesting his innocence as he tried to stay in the flat. "The protocol's quite clear," said another man, stepping into Jed's view. He wore a crisp white shirt with a bright yellow tie. His hair was neatly trimmed, and as he spoke, he consulted the clipboard in his hands. "In their probation period, any transgressions by a probationer mean immediate demotion." He pulled a face as he looked into the flat, then glanced at Harris. "I don't think you were suited to yellow anyway. Take him to the transfer lift." Harris yelled obscenities at Graham as the guards dragged him off. "For you, it's more tricky," he said, turning to Jed and the others. "Step one's clear. Search them." Jed was spun round and frisked. There was nothing he could do to hide his phone, and the guard with the moustache pulled it out triumphantly from Jed's pocket. He handed it to the man with the tie. "Excellent work, Blakeson," the manager said. "This will be noted in your next appraisal." Jed stared at them, amazed. What on earth were they on about? Any fool could have searched Jed's pockets, and yet they both made it look like the guard had pulled off something important. The manager inspected the phone, then suddenly realised what it was. "This is a banned device," he said, a mixture of excitement and nervousness in his voice. "I'm sure it is." He put the phone in a pocket and flipped over several pages on his clipboard. Couldn't find what he was looking for, so pulled a small but thick manual from his other pocket. "There," he said in triumph, pointing to a page inside. "No one's ever seen one of these for real, but this looks just like the picture." "I'm sure you'll find there's been a..." Graham began. The manager snapped shut the manual and read from the front of his clipboard. "All persons who do not cooperate fully with the investigating manager," he read in a loud voice, "shall be issued with their P45 without delay." The manager then looked pointedly at Graham. "That means one more word from you and you're fired." Graham didn't try to say any more, closed his mouth. "Where did you get this?" the manager asked Jed, taking the phone from his pocket once the manual was safely stowed in the other one. Jed couldn't believe the attitude here. It was worse than in green. It doesn't matter where I got it. What matters is there are hundreds, if not thousands of people trapped in green. You have to start transferring them now." The manager blinked at Jed. "I asked you where you obtained this banned device." Jed glared at the man. "There's a huge monster eating its way up the tower, and all you want to know about is a phone." "Phone," the man repeated. He then swapped the phone for the manual again from his pockets. "Phone," he muttered as he flicked through the book. "I thought as much. There's no protocol for possession of a phone. I'll have to pass this one up to my immediate superior." Jed was about to say something else when someone cut across him. It was Clarice. "Haven't you listened to anything this young man has said? He's telling the truth." "Take Fungus and his parents up to Deputy Vice President Smith, and take this as well." The manager handed the guard the phone as Jed glared at Graham. "They're not my problem anymore." Jed seethed as the guards marched them down the corridor towards the lifts. If Graham hadn't been so stupid, they wouldn't be in this mess. Ahead of them, the manager strode in another direction, as if on vitally important business. One look at the phone, and Smith sent them to his superior, who then sent them on to his. This happened time after time, each manager refusing to take responsibility until Jed and the others had been escorted the height of yellow all the way up to the border with orange. As they were marched from one person to another, Jed realised that not only was he running out of time, but yellow wouldn't open its doors to anyone from below. No one would take that decision. No one would decide what to do with a phone for Tower's sake, let alone a crowd of refugees. Without an order from above telling them to obey, Yellow would simply dither and fuss while the mass destroyed them all. At last, they were shown into a small office and locked inside. There was clearly no higher authority for them to be passed on to. "Nice going, Quercus," Jed muttered at Graham. He looked around the windowless space. A desk occupied the middle of the room. On the desktop was a spotless rectangular blotter with a row of pens neatly ranged beside it. At the desk, on a square of ornately patterned yellow carpet, sat a plastic chair. There was also a filing cabinet in the corner. Jed tried the doors. They were locked. "Well, there was nothing wrong with my plan," Graham said frostily, as Jed stared at the ceiling. "It's got us to the top of yellow." Jed didn't bother replying. Instead, he swept the pens and jotter off the desk. "I know this place is frustrating, but there's no need to be destructive," Clarice said. "Don't you two get it?" Jed asked, plonking the chair on top of the desk. "If we don't get a move on, then it won't be me who's destroying this place." Jed climbed on the desk. "Well, what on earth are you doing now?" Graham asked. Jed sighed. "In your offices in green, what's on the ceiling?" "Pipes, cables, wires, that sort of thing," Graham said. "Well, here," Jed said, climbing onto the chair, "there's nothing." Above him, neat round lights shone down from their recesses in a square pattern of ceiling tiles. "Which means the cables must be hidden. Which means there's a space above this ceiling." As if to prove the point, he lifted one of the squares and moved it sideways. Above was a wirework of supports for the tile frame, along with the ventilation ducts and cables. He could see across the roof spaces of what he presumed were offices next door, right away into the distance. Jed pulled himself up. The wires strained. They wouldn't take much weight before they broke. "Well, hey, what about us?" Graham asked. Jed looked back down. "The ceiling isn't strong enough for you." "Well, isn't there a sliding door or something on one of the walls?" Graham went on. "I wouldn't know," Jed answered, "as for some reason I appear to have had my phone confiscated." He began to crawl carefully away. Graham's head appeared behind him. You promised to come back for us, do you hear?" "Shh," Jed hissed. "Promise!" Okay, I promise," Jed whispered. "Slide that ceiling tile back and put the furniture where it should be." And with that, he moved further off, hoping that the other offices hadn't heard. He crawled away, feeling at last that he might stand a chance of making it now he was on his own. His plan was simple. If he could just reach Red and the new chief executive, then maybe they would issue the order to open up Yellow. An instruction all those managers and vice presidents couldn't ignore. The crawl over the ceiling was difficult. Very often ducting for ventilation or heating filled the space, forcing Jed to follow them until he could find a way past. It was all he could do to keep himself going in what he hoped was the right direction. At last, he could go no further. A blockwork wall ran right across in front of him, and gingerly he lifted a tile to find himself staring down on an office full of people, all surrounded by neat piles of paper on their desks. He slid the tile back into place, grimacing to himself, and moved on. At last, he lifted a tile looking into a dark room full of buckets and cleaning equipment. Jed let himself down as quietly as he could and eased open the door. He was looking out at the transfer lifts up to Orange. Queues of people snaked this way and that, some clearly going up, others arriving on their way down. The queues were so long they even extended down the corridor to his right. Everyone looked glum, and it was hard to tell which queue was which, or which desk they'd eventually end up at. Behind the desks, clerks milled around importantly, but from what Jed could see, rarely did anything to progress the queue. There was no way he could sneak through here. It also made him all the more convinced that without the right piece of paper from the right person, there was no way Yellow was going to listen to him. Jed decided the only way to reach Orange would be to use the recycling shafts. They bored right through the concrete dividers between the colours. However, it would be tricky, for he'd have to climb between the waste deliveries. All he had to do was to try to remember where they were in relation to the transfer lifts. Jed managed to orientate himself and realised the way he needed to go was down the crowded corridor. He looked about the room, finding a row of cleaning carts against one wall. He grabbed one and pulled it out, adding mops, buckets and cleaning equipment from the racks on the other wall. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, he wheeled the cart out of the cupboard. People in the line looked at the equipment, then at Jed, some of them glancing disdainfully at his filthy overalls, but none of them stopped him. He walked on, convinced that someone would call out at any minute. But at last the corridor became quieter, and he made it to the recycling centre. Jed pushed his cart inside, then carefully closed the door behind him. He nearly jumped when a voice addressed him from behind the control panel near the door. "Oh, you're early, which is good, and filthy, which isn't." The supervisor wore an immaculate yellow coverall. "Yeah, sorry, my last job was a bit dirty," Jed replied meekly, having to think quickly. "That's no excuse," the supervisor said. "Next time I see you, if your overalls don't match the colour of mine, I'll report you to your manager." Jed nodded. Satisfied, the supervisor let Jed wheel the trolley away from the panel and down to the far end of the room. Ahead of him were the huge pipes and their feed hoppers for all the recycling from this floor. It was the cleanest, most spotless room he'd ever seen. Mrs. F. would have approved. Jed abandoned the cart and, checking to see that the man at the far end was engrossed in his work, moved from pipe to pipe, placing his hands on each one in turn, at last finding one that didn't vibrate. He crept around to the entry valve, checked over his shoulder again. The man was busily ticking off something on a chart on the wall. Jed pressed the button on the control panel to open the valve and eased himself into the feed hopper. A small amount of cardboard lined the metal floor. Slowly, in front of him, the valve began to open. Jed made ready to sneak in, when suddenly something flew out at him, shrieking and screaming. Jed didn't have time to fight back as he was struck in the face and crashed backwards, hitting his head on the side of the hopper. He was only vaguely aware of something landing on him as he blacked out. Thank you very much for listening to The Rainbow Tower. To see more of R H Stewart's excellent artwork, you'll find him on Instagram at roy.hootson.stewart. For Alex Tymms, why not try the novel OutCaste at ao3.com? Or, for something completely different, check out the Amier series on YouTube or at amier.com, also by Alex Tymms. The Rainbow Tower. Text copyright Alex Tymms. Illustrations copyright R H Stewart. The right of Alex Tymms and R H Stewart to be identified as the author and illustrator of this work has been asserted in accordance with the Copyright Designs and Patents Act 1988.